Hello everybody, welcome to the Boxing Science Podcast. Today we've got a very special episode with UFC Performance Institute Vice President of Performance, Dr Duncan French. Now we're going to speak to Duncan about a range of different subjects and topics around his role at the UFC PI, which includes the launch of the Shanghai facility, and also how the UFC is adapting to lockdown. You know, UFC have been the first main sporting organisation to be putting back on live events. So we wanted to know what are the challenges with training, with testing, to make sure that the athletes are safe and everybody else is safe as well. Before we get into this episode, I'd just like to mention, if you're not already a subscriber yet, please hit the subscribe button. And also, on the Boxing Science membership, we have a range of different workshops that can explain more about the training methods of the UFC Performance Institute. This is delivered by Duncan himself and strength and conditioning coach Bo Sandoval. So if you want to know about the training, the testing and the research methods that the UFC Performance Institute are currently doing in the sport of MMA, then you can access this on the Boxing Science membership. It's a 7-day free trial and it's just £8.99 a month after that. Okay, so let's get on with this episode with Dr. Duncan French of the UFC Performance Institute. Welcome everybody to this episode. I'm joined by Dr. Alan Ruddock. Alan, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Very excited for this episode because we're also joined by the UFC Vice President of Performance, Dr. Duncan French. How are you doing, Duncan?
Hi boys, how are you going? It's good to hear from you and see you.
Yeah, good stuff. How's lockdown been? Have you been able to have a little bit of rest? Obviously, it's got really busy now. How's it been generally for you? Obviously, we're in Wakefield and Sheffield. It's normally quiet around here, but I expect the hustle and bustle of Las Vegas, it being very, very different.
Yeah, and that was like everyone. It's quarantine's been a strange time, but just going down the strip and seeing the casinos closed and none of the flashing lights here in Vegas, it's fascinating. It's been like a ghost town. So yeah, really strange. But I mean, listen, from a personal perspective, took me about 2 weeks at home to kind of get into a routine and a cadence. I was all over the show, right? You normally come to work, you're pretty on point, and it definitely took me a while to figure out what's this new approach. But after that, I got into a pretty good routine. I set up my days, put structure to my days. I was working out, 2-3 times a day around kind of work. So I actually found it quite good. It was refreshing for me. Obviously, I was around the family as well, which was nice. Bit of a challenge because obviously the 3-year-old sees his daddy at home and thinks it's playtime, whereas normally I'm at work. So that was a challenge, but it's been tough because it's monotony, right? And it's we're social animals. We want to interact with people, and just being stuck at home without your athletes around you, without talking to your colleagues and stuff, it was certainly weird. And a bit zoomed out, and everyone's doing video calls and all that type of stuff. So pleased to be back into some amount of routine here at the PI.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with you there. Reason why we got into strength conditioning in the first place is because we like being in the gym, we like working with athletes, and that day-to-day kind of social activity. That's my main kind of social life, really, seeing the boxers and having a laugh with them. Right. So obviously it's your first time on the Boxing Science podcast, but you've been on a couple of combat conditioning online conferences. Obviously you've got your workshop on the Boxing Science membership. So a lot of the Boxing Science audience will know who you are. For those minority who don't, could you give yourself a quick fire introduction to yourself, what your role is and what that requires on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so like you said at the end of the conversation, I'm the Vice President of Performance at the UFC Performance Institute. The headquarters of the UFC is here in Las Vegas, although we also have a facility over in Shanghai, China. So it's truly a global infrastructure now that I kind of manage and coordinate. And that role and responsibility encompasses a variety of things, but largely what I say, we have a global roster of about 600 fighters, and any interface with those fighters from a health, well-being or performance perspective largely comes under my remit. So I manage a team of 18 here 18 performance staff here in Vegas. I think it's 16 in China. So yeah, it's kind of coordinating, managing the strategy, the philosophy, interrogating our services, how we're going to operate and deliver everything from nutrition to strength and conditioning to psychology to medical services, etc. So yeah, really exciting role, and it's going super well. I'm excited.
Right, that Duncan, that overview there, that general overview that you gave of your role at the UFC, really leads me into my first question, because a few days ago, you I think it was on Instagram, you had a social media post, and you talked in the caption, I think it was about a book, about being a general specialist. And I've seen you from afar doing lots of different roles and having lots of different interests over the years. But can you explain in a bit of detail what do you mean by a general specialist, and do you think practitioners should work towards being a general specialist?
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, thanks for following my social media, Alan. You're a legend. You might be. I give you props for that. No, I mean, I'm not. I put a post up, yeah, because I was reading a book called Peak by Dr. Mark Bubbs, and it was just talking about kind of, general experts, and something which I've always kind of felt a little bit, not ashamed about, but, people celebrate that I'm, Coach X, or I'm nutritionist Y, or, I'm put myself as an expert in a particular box. And over my years throughout my career, my background is, initially as a sports scientist, and then I moved very much into coaching. I became a strength and conditioning coach for a long time, but also I'd kind of always had this kind of sports science and academic side ticking along aside my coaching. So, we live in a reductionist world. I think in sports performance, we're always looking for the minutiae, the finite item. That is something that we can regulate, upregulate, downregulate, control, change to optimize performance. And I think we get stuck in this reductionist world. We also really want to define ourselves, as I say, like a coach. Now, when I look at sport, I find it impossible to take one domain, one technical area. Let's take, medical rehabilitation. I find it impossible to look at how you do medical, a rehabilitation of an athlete from an injury without considering the role of inflammation and how we know nutrition can affect inflammation, or, that end stage rehab that the S&C coach needs to come on board with, the psychology of what the athlete is going through at that moment in time when they've been removed from training and competition. Like, the more you look at it, the more I look at it, I find it impossible to segregate and silo the technical areas and technical domains of an organism that is so interactive. So, that's what I mean. And by talking about myself as a specialist generalist is, yeah, I've been a strength coach, and, I still consider myself a strength coach, but by having an insight and starting to understand pieces of other technical areas, I find it a real weapon to my arsenal, to certainly in the role that I'm in right now, where I'm managing a performance structure, to be able to have powerful conversations across the board, and to be able to say, I'm not just sitting in an S&C domain talking about sets, reps, recovery, frequencies. I'm pulling in, how my nutritionist is going to fuel that. I'm going to pull in how my medical personnel is going to help me minimize some of those pre-existing injury risk factors, from posture. We work with combat fighters. Posture is a massive thing, and we know that has got chronic issues over time. So that's kind of where I'm coming from now. And, as I've a bit older in my career, I'm a bit more confident and comfortable to say, actually, I don't just need to be a strength coach. Listen, I want to be the best strength coach and sports scientist I can be. Trust me, I'm trying to dominate that industry and be seen as someone that's really, really good at what I do. But I'm also comfortable in saying, actually, let's take a broader look at this thing, because it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very easy to be dichotomous, isn't it? Very easy to look at black and white, very easy to sit in one camp or the other, or be on one side of the pendulum at one particular time. But communication and integration and working interdisciplinary is really important, especially at the top level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And like I say, it's almost dirty saying, I'm a generalist. I look at everything because people want to, in the world we live in, I know it's human nature trying to separate yourself from the crowd. So if you're a strength coach, you want to be the man, you want to be the alpha strength coach, right? But sometimes I'm happy just being kind of middle of the pack, but having more strings to my bow. You know what I mean? I feel like in the world of problem solving, which is what sports performance is, every athlete is a athletic problem that you're trying to figure out. The more ways I can solve that problem, the more likelihood is I'm going to be able to influence it. If I've only got one equation that I can solve the problem with, and that's strength and conditioning, then I'm kind of stuck there, So again, that comes back to some of my time back in the Inks Institute and some of the philosophical stuff we talked about there. But definitely looking at it as a problem-solving aspect where you need to be able to create different approaches to solving the same problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I can definitely resonate with that, Duncan, being obviously a strength and conditioning coach in boxing. They take a lot of confidence and a lot of priority into their conditioning methods. Now I'm the front line of developing that program and delivering it, whereas Alan's the physiologist. If I just depended on Alan's knowledge all the time, I'd be literally, there'd be two strands of conversation rather than kind of right, I've increased my knowledge in this area. I'm now able to program. If we've got specific issues, then I'd go to Alan for that. So I can definitely resonate with that. You just need to try and, especially when you're working as part of a team, then you can have some understanding of where that practitioner is coming from when they're having to deal with a certain issue. We just talked about lockdown. Obviously, it's affected all live sports, but the UFC being the standout sport, that's, I don't know whether there has been another sport that's come back, but it is the main sport that has come back. Now, what are the key kind of testing and safety methods that the UFC put in place to put them live events on?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we take the lead from our president, Dana White, who, as you all know, is very gung-ho and wants to blaze a trail. So, it's the nature of the UFC as a company, is we're disruptors. We want to do things and want to get things going. And the fans are crying out for live events and live sport, do you know what I mean? So we've got fighters that need to earn a living and need to fulfill contracts and those types of things. So it's really been interesting, and we're very proud about what we've achieved by being the first world sport back on fully operational. And of course, there's been a lot of considerations, weeks and weeks and weeks of planning around strategy and operational procedures to minimize the risk of infection, which is when you look at putting on a UFC event or a fight event, there's so much that goes into it. Normally there's about 300 staff on the ground at an event. I think we stripped that back to about 140. So, skeleton staff, minimizing social distancing, even talking about warm-up rooms and how you can, how you take the different teams. And, normally we'll pair teams up, but, it's individual rooms, how many, corners you can have. All the corners are wearing masks throughout the whole kind of event. The only people that are not wearing PPE is, two fighters and a referee. We've looked at medical grade air filters. Every athlete on fight week goes through an antigen test for COVID-19, and they go into quarantine before, from having the test to before they get the results, they have to remain in quarantine, i.e. in their hotel rooms. And when they get a negative test back, then they're allowed into kind of the bubble that we've created at the event hotel. But that means that then our nutrition team have to deliver food. So, we've got guys that are obviously trying to make weight descents and weight cuts. And, how do you do that in a hotel room when you can't necessarily get out and do your, get your sweat on? And so, a lot of meal delivery strategy, how we've done that. Obviously the traffic flow through different facilities and distancing and all this type of stuff. So it's been really unique. I think, one thing that's helped us is we're an individual sport. I've spoken to colleagues in the NFL and in the Premier League, about what they're trying to do with high groups of players, and just getting them through workouts and things like that. And I don't envy them, to be honest with you. If you think about 80 players going on an NFL team trying to do the same workout, I mean, just the management of that alone is a logistical nightmare. So for us, it's been a little bit better. The challenge has been, different people coming from all over America. You don't know the background where they're coming from. So yeah, just managing the barriers of protection and the disinfectant between bouts of the octagon and those types of things. There's been a massive kind of operational change for us, but touch wood, so far it's gone real well. And we even had 3 positive cases of coronavirus on our very first event that we put on in Jacksonville 2 weeks ago now. 1 fighter and 2 of his cornermen. So it really pressure tested the system on day one, and it responded pretty well.
That's fantastic. It's really inspiring to see, that drive from the UFC. Just seeing that Dana's done a podcast with Eddie Earn, and he's giving him full of inspiration, saying that you can do it. We've shown that you can do it. So it's good.
On a fight in a castle, isn't he, or something?
Pardon?
You put on a fight in a castle courtyard or something, Eddie?
Yeah, so he's doing basically Matchroom Boxing HQ, which used to actually be his house, what he grew up in. So the term is fighting in Eddie Earn's back garden.
Right, nice.
So we've got a fighter, Jordan Gill, that is looking to be on one of them cards, and the main challenge for him is that the date keeps changing.
Yeah.
So it's been very kind of challenging for myself to be putting that program in place, and like how long the phases are going to be. With yourself, Duncan, what has been the main challenges training wise in terms of the athletes, short training camps, changes of dates? I saw, I don't know whether I can pronounce his name right. Is it Glover Teixeira? Is that right? Or have I butchered his name? Teixeira. Okay. Oh, close. He spoke volumes of like kind of the nutrition. I suppose like weight making is a massive challenge when they've been in lockdown. What were the key methods that you put in place, and what kind of levels of communication did you have with the athletes?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that the psychological piece of it has been the biggest piece for our interaction with fighters. Anxiety. Am I training enough? I've not had a proper camp. My camp looks different. I've been working out in my garage. I've not got as many looks with training partners because I can't, social distancing means I can't bring, my normal looks that I would bring in, and I'd have 6 training partners and I've only been allowed to have 2, So all those kind of human factors have been the biggest thing that has become apparent, is just anxiety and routine from a change from the norm. Like how do you manage fighters and their mindset? Because obviously we know fighter mindset is a massive part of what we deal with. So, we've navigated through that collectively as a group, I guess what, messaging is everyone's been in the same boat largely, no one's had a perfect camp. And then, we do a lot of stuff remotely anyway, normally. But again, we've had to magnify that and maximize that impact through, meal delivery strategies with our dietitians, where we're really handling mailing out meals, looking at remote programming from an S&C perspective, and really working with, the fighter and their coach to understand what have they got access to. How are we going to get through some conditioning work? Is there a need for strength power work, or is it more just maintenance? Can we get by? Can we maintain? And I think that's kind of not a conversation that you often have. You're always talking about maximizing, where actually it might have been right. We've got to be efficient with understanding where we can get some wins and gains, and something where if we do some bodyweight circuits, or you've got these 3 kettlebells, like yourself out in the backyard, Dan.
Yeah.
What are we doing that we're comfortable that's just maintaining what we already had? There's a certain amount of maintenance work that has to be done. So it's been unique. I mean, from our staff's perspective, it's really challenging just because everything's sending out information, jumping on calls, trying to manage the process from afar is a task in itself. But yeah, when you look at people like Glover making nice comments like that, it just goes to show that the reassurance of putting professionals and experts around, a fighter, gives them that confidence that, all right, I'm within these crazy circumstances, I'm doing the best I can, I'm maximizing all the aspects, and I'm ticking the boxes. So that's been really interesting. Again, it's been another stress test for our team, and every fighter has been in different circumstances. But yeah, I think we've done a pretty decent job. Everything from giving out equipment to from the PI here in Vegas to our local fighters. I mean, we blitzed the weight room and all the equipment. We were driving around in vans and pickups and dropping it off in people's garages and stuff. So everything from that through to, all right, how do we then speak to someone in New York or Florida, or figure out what they're doing and what can they get access to, whether it's out in the open or whether it's kind of in the house or apartment.
Yeah, we speak about optimization a lot, and not just optimization in terms of programming or physiological adaptations, but optimizing in terms of logistics and resources and all the different constraints that come with a program. And we try and optimize every single opportunity, and that's what everyone has been trying to do in these times. And no matter whether it's the equipment that you've got available to do some S&C, or the field that you've got to do some running on, Danny's done a great job in trying to optimize in all our guys' training.
You make a great point, Alan, because if you think about it, this might be the only time when people are truly coming from the same base level, right? Normally, some people have got like a gym that they work out with, a ton of strength and conditioning equipment and access to that, whereas someone else just might be, hitting bags in the garage or whatever it may be. Whereas this time, everyone's back down to baseline. And to get in this scenario, and what we've been messaging is, you're going to get competitive advantage by being logistically efficient and optimizing the domain that you're in, the environment that you're in. And I think that never happens. If you think of all the other sports as well, every Premier League team or every, NFL team or every baseball team out there, they're all at the same level. So the teams this season that are going to be the ones that are successful are the ones that have adapted and optimized the limitations of quarantine and COVID environment, right? So that's a fascinating way to look back at, all right, did we optimize and maximize the potential?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely agree with that. And I think that fighters that have got a team in place appreciate their team even more now, when, it's great when all things are going good, but when, shit hits the fan, how are you going to adapt? And this is where you tap into experts, because probably if we give 100% our best, but I think we only give the fighters probably about 30% of what we can do, 40% of what we can do in terms of like in the weight room. But then you kind of tap into that extra 15, 60% when it's not so good. It's easy to get somebody squatting well, benching heavy. But what happens if there's an injury, there's niggle, and you've got to work around it? What happens if the sparring loads go too high and you've got to deload? I think in this time, it's great to have a team around you that can adapt around the situation.
Some things about like combat sport athletes, because everyone thinks, combat sport's an individual sport and you're just smashing out on your own. But training partners, sparring partners, are a massive part. Getting different looks of your next potential opponent and someone mocking that up and simulating it is a huge part. Now, if social distancing is causing you can't be close to people, and if you think about our sport in particular, you need looks for jiu-jitsu, you need looks for wrestling, you need looks for striking and Muay Thai and kickboxing. You need loads of different sparring partners and training partners. If that's removed, it's like, holy shit, I can only do so many squats, Dan, and then the technical stuff is really starting to suffer.
Exactly. So it's been probably about 2 years since we caught up and we did our interview for YouTube. At that point, the UFC Performance Institute were just around about 1 year in, and I think you said that you had around about 20%, 30% of the fighters come through Performance Institute either for like some sort of training or testing. What are the current figures at the moment? What's the progress being made? Are more teams and athletes being more open to be working at the institute?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to that first year, and it was a little bit chaotic. Do you know what I mean? We were a new kid on the block. We didn't really know what it was going to be or how it would go. But yeah, I mean, in 3 years we've made great strides, and really excited about where we've got to. We've got a global roster in the UFC of about 600. We've worked well over 520 of those fighters. So we're up in the 90% of the roster have actually come and worked with us here at the UFC. Now on a monthly basis, we're directly programming and supporting about 175 fighters on the roster. Some are obviously off camp, some are moving towards fights and in camp. So yeah, those numbers are exciting. And what we want to obviously try and do is maximize the retention. We don't just want someone to fly in from Brazil or whatever it may be and spend 2 weeks with us and then go back to Brazil and nothing happens. It's like we're trying to influence behaviors and cultures across time. So the retention of how we get them to come back and revisit us, or how we work with them remotely, is a huge part of our strategy. But yeah, we're massively excited about where we've got to. And the fighters on the roster see the Performance Institute as a resource right now. And that's been fantastic. There's a trust and a relationship, and also an awareness of what is it? Do you know what I mean? Like in the UFC and MMA prior to the PI, there was very little high performance kind of infrastructure. Now we've got medical staff and nutritionists at events throughout fight week, managing full cuts and feeding throughout the whole fight week. We've got remote programming going on around the world where we can look at diagnostics and monitoring data coming into our clouds and stuff like that. So yeah, it's on many different levels, and it's really exciting to see how the fighters appreciate coming back to Glover. They see the value of it, and it's still an a la carte service, right? It's still not one size fits all. We're very custom in what we do. Somebody might just want nutritional or dietary intervention support, and that might be the only part of our service that we offer them. Somebody else over here might want the full kind of kitchen sink and everything. So it's very custom, it's very bespoke, but that's why it works, because people might have their own strength coaches. They might be comfortable with that piece, but they might need some medical advice, and then we can bolt in or plug that hole in their kind of portfolio. So it's kind of the cross we bear, is that everything's very fluid and custom, but also that's why it works for the fighters, because they can pick and choose the extent to which they need our services.
That's great. You mentioned like trust and relationships and awareness there, and clearly that's all those factors are helping with that retention strategy. Have you found anything that works exceptionally well, apart from being fluid and customized and working on a one-to-one basis? I mean, you mentioned that some of the guys might be coming in for diet, but then you do a really good job with the guys that come in for diet, and then they go, well, actually, we want a little bit of S&C, or we want a little bit of medical support and things like that. Have you found anything that stands out from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you've just nailed it, Alan, right? So I think, you answered your own question. In as much as, yeah, we align our services on an individual level. So if you look at combat sports and your boxers, in individual sports, people often are looking for, like, how do I differentiate myself from the crowd? What am I doing differently? How am I getting competitive advantage? Now, that can take it one or two ways. It can go down a rabbit hole of thinking they're doing things differently, and it can be absolute garbage. Or they can actually try and find competitive advantage and separate themselves from the crowd by doing things that are really valuable to them. So what we try and do is the latter, and customize all of our messaging and say, listen, we're not creating, cookie cutter programming. We're going to look at you. We're going to monitor and analyze your physiology. And then we're going to decide strategically what we're doing for you. This is purely custom. There's no one else in the UFC getting the same approach and the same strategy as you are. And this person over here, they're getting a different strategy. So that immediately starts to say, for the athlete, hold on, this is about me. This is an individual thing, because otherwise, if I go to a gym and I go to a pro practice with 30 other fighters and we're doing the same 90-minute practice, everyone's working the same practice, but those guys that might be in camp and working to a fight are going to be the priority guys. And if you're off camp, you're going to be just a training body, right? Whereas now it's like, it's you, regardless of whether you're in camp, off camp, whatever. We're aligning all of our services to you. That's massive for buy-in, engagement and buy-in. Now, obviously, you got to do the legwork of trust and continuing to build relationships and positivity and connection. That's the human element. That's a given as a coach. You got to do the hard yards to build the relationships. But yeah, the once you've got them bought into a particular way of we can connect and intentionally improve you, then yeah, we can open up our menu and say, hey, you're working with our S&C coaches right now, but coming back to one of my earlier comments, if we bring on the nutritionist on board, we're gonna potentiate, we're gonna supersede where we would got to if we just engage with S&C. So are you open to having a chat with a dietitian about fueling these S&C sessions, and then you can start opening up the bigger portfolio. So yeah, it starts with customization, but then it's about customization on many levels with different discussions, like I say, around athletic performance and all the different attributes you need to address.
And do you find that model that you've got in Vegas still works in Shanghai? I assume there's more barriers to perhaps knowledge transfer with English speaking practitioners that are working with there and the Asian athletes. Do you find there's any barriers in Shanghai to that particular way of working?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously we've got Chinese staff and we've got Westernized staff in Shanghai, and we also have all the MMA staff, so the coaches. We've got technical. We employ the technical coaches there, which is we don't have that here in Vegas, right? So it's a true high performance team in Shanghai, around about 36 different individual fighters. There's obviously massive cultural barriers, and there's massive, not barriers, but differences. And there's massive language barriers for our Western staff. But, we use our Chinese staff for translation purposes. But again, from the outset of building Shanghai, it was always about, we can't just take what we've got in Vegas and put it in Shanghai, because culturally their approach is different. The Chinese way of training is different. The Chinese mentality of rigidity and routine and a hierarchical approach to authority, all this stuff, in Western world, you don't have the same kind of mentality. So we went into that knowing that we've got to get the cultural piece right. We've got to be able to get athletes to buy in culturally so it can't be a million miles from what they're used to, because they'll just get turned off by that. So yeah, Shanghai was an interesting project, and I think we're still doing a decent job of it. But a lot of educational lectures and presentations that have to go from English to Chinese, and if things lost in translation or what. But we've got Chinese staff that speak English, and we can upskill them in terms of the specific messaging, the physiology, that what are we trying to get to, and then they can message it accurately rather than just using a generic Chinese translator who's not a specialist in nutrition or S&C. That's critical. But yeah, you make a good point that we had to think really about the behavioral side of things, not just, all right, let's roll out a training plan.
And because you were thinking about that, the behavioral aspects and the language, do the goals and objectives of the Shanghai center differ to the Vegas center in terms of maybe performance and development?
The do and the don't. I mean, it's not like we're writing the KPIs and objectives around, are we doing a good job of getting them to educate and understand what we're trying to do. The KPIs at China, probably more so than here in Vegas, are about winning and success. Yeah. Because that's a talent pathway, right? So what we want to do is from that academy, pull them into the big UFC. Now that is about numbers. That's a numbers game. Absolutely. It's a talent pathway. So some of the KPIs in China are a little bit more black and white of we would like X amount of, or X percentage of, athletes graduating from the academy into the UFC. So, that puts the staff over there under the spotlight a little bit to try and be successful. But we've employed staff that can be super creative, and we've got confidence that will navigate around the cultural and ethnical and language barriers and find creative ways to do it. But the objectives remain the same. It's about creating winners in the UFC. It's about creating exciting fighters that have got some resilience and can fight at the highest level, and they're entertaining for fans. And along the way, we want to also collect and aggregate insights that we can share with the global combat community to demonstrate new knowledge, new insights. What we're finding with MMA fighters.
All the stuff that you've said, Duncan, it seems like a very athlete-centered approach. I wondered whether you've kind of explored into like coach education, as in like the teams of the athletes as well.
Yeah, so I mean, crystal ball stuff here now, but yeah, I mean, we're big believers in you got to influence the influencers, right? And we can have an athlete that potentially comes to Vegas and spends some time with us, or goes to our academy in Shanghai, really enjoys what they're doing, sees benefit to it, then goes back to their camp, and the coach has not been with them, and they go back to the same kind of routine and same stuff that they've always been doing. So it's counterproductive. So we've got to get to the influencers, and it's usually the coaching staff, right? Yeah. We've done that to some extent through coach summits here in Vegas, through the journal and stuff like that. We realize we've got to expand that massively. So moving forwards here from 2020, 2023, we've just reset some of our targets and our goals and our objectives. Educational outreach is a massive kind of strategy for us moving forwards digitally. How can we connect with those coaches? How can we upskill them around what we would consider fundamental performance theory that they might need some insight to? How can we accredit that? How can we make it something that has got a badge of honor attached to it to have that level of expertise? So, if you watch out here online for the coming months and years, but it's a massive movement and a new arm of our business model that we're going to be working on here through the PI.
Absolutely. I think we're at Boxing Science, we discovered that within like probably the first couple of years of like the boxers do what the coaches tell them. So for us to have that impact on strength and conditioning sports science, we need to find a way to educate the coaches. And, a lot of boxing coaches now are conforming and being more open to strength and conditioning, but it really lies in the coach, because obviously you've got 600 different athletes all over the world, and you need to have that remote access, that remote support. And you see, like you say, you're seeing them like for a set amount of time in Vegas, and then they go off, and 90% of the time they spend with their teams, they'll be looking direct for their kind of support. I think a key thing that you have done really well with the UFC PI is the cross-sectional analysis. That's a fantastic resource for coaches and for athletes too. Seeing that and knowing kind of how much hard work would go into something like that, it's really inspiring to see. First of all, how did you go about orchestrating, collecting all that data, being able to analyze it too?
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words, Dan. Obviously, we appreciate it. And like I say, we've got a second journal dropping soon here at the end of summer. Wow. So watch out for that. It's going to be 2 times the size of the previous one. It's also going to be, a largely digital access as well. I know the first one kind of went a bit viral as a PDF document, but this is going to be very much open access, interactive online, so a bit of a different format, but it's still our second journal. So a lot of updated theory, data, et cetera, et cetera. But coming back to your question, I mean, we always had the ambition to stay kind of quiet for the first year. We you can't swing your nuts after 3 months of just working in a new sport and say you know everything about it. So one of the great things that we can do here at the Performance Institute, because we work across the whole roster, is aggregate cross-sectional data. Now we're not telling any other fighter what a specific another fighter's data looks like, but if we pool all that data, we can start to get real cross-sectional awareness in a weight class or across a female division or a male division. And that is the power of our data. And nobody else can do that, right? Because no one else has access to the statistical numbers that we can really do, good analytics on it. So that immediately was something we say, well, we've got to get this out to the guys, because it's going to help them make better informed decisions. If you know what your weight class looks like in a performance attribute or a conditioning attribute, or if we know what the top 5 KPIs for each weight class are from a fight success perspective, that's the type of conversation that we should be having at the highest level in any sport. You know, what are the determinants of success, and what's the gap analysis from success and where I am as a fighter or as an athlete. So that's what we did. We said we're going to reverse engineer the sport. We're going to figure out as much as we can around competition. We're going to share that. We're going to do some internal analytics. You know, we have a company called 3027 that does all the coding, all the statistics of about 167 different stats for every fight. Now they're open access online, but we took them and then we put them through our own analytics in terms of, all right, can we look at the KPIs that, you know, is it, you know, the UFC is largely a striking sport right now, based on, you know, how we look at the key performance indicators for each weight class. But a lot of the rules and how the judges are seeing it is things like takedowns and time in top control and those types of things. So there's a little bit of a paradox there. That's kind of fascinating. Like, what do you do with that? What does a coach do with that technically and tactically? So those types of conversations, overlaid with obviously the data that we were then starting to aggregate just here in the PI with our testing and monitoring and assessment, you know, a pretty robust strength power profile, a pretty robust ESD profile, some longitudinal monitoring characteristics in terms of wellness and readiness. So they then overlaid that with the fight statistics. And now you've got, you know, a pretty powerful conversation starter that someone can map themselves against. You know, I don't know that there's any other league. Let's take, you know, the Premier League. You can't, nowhere is every central midfielder in the Premier League being assessed and monitored and tested. And you put all that information together, and now the central midfielder at Liverpool can see how they compare against every other central midfielder in the Premier League. They can try to do some of it through video analytics, but you can't get down to their truest awareness of what their VO2 is, or what their, you know, their strength or their explosive nature is. Whereas we can do that, and that I think is what has been so fascinating to the sports performance world. It's a pretty unique position we're in.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like to get all that data, and obviously you've only been running 3 years now. To get all that data, we've been running about 6-7 years, Alan, and to have something available like that would be a dream. Alan, do you want to come in? I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, but this kind of analysis that you did with the UFC PI actually inspired some of our data analysis with the featherweight boxers, Al. What was the determinants of winning, what it takes to win in the featherweight division?
Yeah.
I don't expect exact numbers, by the way, because I put you on the spot.
I'm going to have to pull up the presentation.
Yeah.
So I was giving a presentation for bases on high intensity conditioning for boxing, and in a few weeks on from this presentation, Kid Galahad were boxing for the IBF featherweight world title against Josh Warrington, and so we're trying to pick apart what really it took to win and reverse engineer featherweight performance. So had a group of students doing some performance analysis on all the featherweight world champions and their recent bouts and their modes of victory, their punch activity in the preceding moments before a technical knockout or a knockout, their method of victory, looking at where their activity profiles laid over the rounds, what kind of combinations they were throwing, and things like that, and then trying to merge that into against or overlay it against Josh Warrington's performances and kind of do almost like I said, Duncan, like a gap analysis for where we we're trying to play and position Kid Galahad's conditioning for that particular fight. So we were trying to do a little bit of reverse engineering with that small group of like me and Danny and our students, and trying to pick apart that elite level performance. But like I say, it's very difficult when all those boxers managed by different people around the world. They're in different promotional companies, and so we don't have that resource available to us to really do reverse engineering of performance, understand what it takes to win, and then look at where the gaps are in performance. We can only do we can only get a best guess really, and do the best we can with the data and the numbers that we've got. But we try to follow a model that's similar to yours and our limited budget and resources, because we know that's, you know, that's what it does take to perform at the highest level, and what it takes to win. And yeah, it's just following that template, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Kudos to you, man. I mean, it's like I say, at least you're trying to do it. I'm not saying at least you're trying. You're doing a good job of it. But yeah, I think we as the UFC, let's say the league, you know, we're putting out that information as a league, as a promotion, whereas no other leagues are doing that, you know. So I think that's what's been interesting. But yeah, on an individual level, that's what you've got to do. You've got to try and get as close to understanding what determines success, and then where does my fighter match up or is different against some of those characteristics of success, and then that drives your tactical decision, right? And then that filters into everything from, okay, if the tactical decision is we're gonna have a pressure fight, you know, we're gonna be pushing forwards, all right, now my energy systems development is related to that, and then my fueling for that energy systems development is related, and then your programming all aligns to what is your end point. Whereas often I see a lot, you know, where, you know, here's the system, you come to, you know, this gym, or you come to our thing, and it's like, this is the system, this is how you're going to train. Well, that's fine, but the system needs to flex at some point, because otherwise you get stuck in this black box. And actually the fight, the evolution of the fight is changing, you know, whether it's rule changes, equipment changes, conditioning strategies are changing, you know, this is moving, and you're staying in a rigid system. So, you know, you've got to constantly look at how success is being achieved, you know, and then match yourself against that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we were using that information for was in conditioning prescriptions. So obviously I've got my own coaching philosophies. I've got my own physiological goals that I want to achieve with certain training strategies, but I was aligning them to the goal and the game plan, and making sure his conditioning was underpinning that game plan, and principally supporting sparring.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like really, really good. And you know, I give you a great acknowledgement for doing that. That's philosophically aligned with what I do, or what we try to do here. And you know, it's fantastic to see it was beneficial for you.
Oh, I didn't win though.
Yeah.
Never mind.
At the end of the day, it's
nearly won.
Putting them in the best position to succeed.
Yeah.
Should have won.
He nearly won.
Should have. Yeah. So one of the things that we have done at Boxing Science, we have created a database, and we create our training philosophy from that. So, for example, lower body rate force development, that transfers into punch. So we try and get our boxers to be able to squat heavy and then be able to be as explosive as possible. From this cross-sectional analysis, what kind of KPIs of strength did you take from it in terms of your testing, and how did that kind of model the strength training approach? Obviously, you're saying about an individual basis, but from a general standpoint, what do UFC and MMA athletes need to do to meet the demands of the sport?
Yeah. I think this is where we go off on a little bit of a tangent to you guys as boxers, right? And it's not that I'm going to say, hey, well, you know, you got to be able to pull 3.5 times your own body weight for you to be a world-class fighter. I think what we find, or what we continue to see, is the influence of stylistic background. And I think stylistic background, people coming from wrestling backgrounds look very different to jiu-jitsu fighters, look very different to strikers, or, you know, the younger generation now that are starting MMA from day one and just pure kind of generic MMA fighters. So I think that's what we do with our data, and that's how we influence our programming. Is it really it really defines, you can really map stylistic background against physical attributes, which is, you can say, oh, no shit, Sherlock, right? But actually, we want to be intentional to the level of which it's different. So if someone's got a Muay Thai or a kickboxing background, and we know that they, the characteristics of isometric force or, lower body strength are significantly greater than they currently demonstrate, but their velocities might be off the charts, we've now got a conversation. We've got to have this conversation around, are you going to make your strength your super strength, let's say? Like, are we going to continue to pursue this X factor that you bring to the table that makes you a world-class fighter? Or are we going to pursue low-hanging fruit? And because if the fight goes to the ground or if someone tries to take you down, you don't have the physical attributes to deal with that. And, just the fights this weekend just gone here in Vegas, there's a couple of fighters that we know and we've worked with, and we know they didn't have strength level, largely strikers, and we know that there were some strength deficits that we would say you got to be stronger. And it was quite evident that they just got taken down and weren't able to, hold off the clinch work. But it comes back to the conversation with the fighter. Like we can only create an advice, right? We're going to say, do you want to make your strength your super strength, or are we going to try and elevate a limitation? And that's kind of a philosophical conversation. We try and shape that. We try and give efficacy why we would want to do more strength work, or why you need, your mid-thigh pull is only, 2.7 times your body weight, and we need to get that closer to 3.3. which is what we see as a standard for kind of our female athletes, let's say. That's we can direct that as much as we want with our strength programming, but they've got to want to go down that journey with us, right? And that's kind of our role as S&C coaches. It's a conversation. Comes back to what you were saying with your the fighter that lost your fight. They're the ones that ultimately have to make the decision about how they want to win the up and coming fight. Now, it might be a wrestler versus a wrestler. Now, what are those physical attributes now null and void, or do you want to try and do something a little bit different to create a new angle, a new wrinkle to what you're doing? Or is it a kickboxer versus a jiu-jitsu fighter? Now they're massively different physiologically from that stylistic background. And I think that's been the power of our data, is really by being able to demonstrate by objective data where someone sits against an opponent, and then or against their weight class, and then they either shit themselves and say, oh, holy crap, I've got to get stronger, or I've got to get faster, or my conditioning is not on point, I need to get more alactic capacity. Or they go, actually, I'm not bothered about that, because I can just take someone's head off with this particular technique that I have, and I'm not really going to bother with that bit over there. So that's kind of that's where the data comes into our decision making and programming. And once the fighters decided what they want to do, now we've got objectivity to continually check against where they should be.
Yeah. Go on.
I was just going to follow on from that in terms of like strength training and preparation. I don't know whether you've seen it, Duncan, but I actually tagged you in a post the other day when I'm doing a series of train like a superstar.
Yeah,
I did the.
Remember all those days back in dirty old gym in Sheffield, Dan, doing the footwork drills.
Yeah, it's I've been using them drills for years, but what we're going to mention is that I'm looking into a lot of like UFC and MMA athletes preparation, and I was watching yesterday George St. Pierre's training, and he's doing like a lot of gymnastics.
Bit of a unicorn, remember? Not everyone trains.
Yeah, but then obviously you got McGregor that does like a lot of like animal flow training. Do you find like a lot of athletes have like these kind of training methods, and how do you kind of factor that into the program?
No, it's
stand out.
It's not the norm, and like I say, it's whether it's Conor getting in bed with Ego Patel and doing some movement stuff, whether it's George and Christian, who was kind of ahead of the game in terms of George working on gymnastics, doing a lot of pool, kind of aquatic pool training, stuff like that. That wasn't the norm, and it's still not the norm, I would say. A lot of fighters play around with different training techniques, training modalities. And remember, we've got different backgrounds, right? We've got guys that have come through collegiate wrestling programs here in America that have got really robust technique on Olympic lifting and weightlifting techniques. We've got other people that have don't believe in any external resistance and just do body weight circuits. We've got big kind of CrossFit mentality where it's just smash it up every time. So we see everything and in between. So we've got to embrace what they want to do. Any training that someone is compliant to is the best training. All right. What we then need to do is build on that, educate and build on what they want to do, what they see value in. So, a lot of guys are doing underwater aquatic breath holds and kind of apnea training right now for hypoxic conditioning, which is growing in our community just because of the nature of the jiu-jitsu component of our sport and kind of the clinch work and, what that sustained breath hold and hypoxic kind of isometric work of jiu-jitsu, what that does, how you simulate that and how you can develop it in training. Versus, George, a lot of people look at George and Christian, what they were doing back in the day, and they emulate, they try to emulate it, but it's not the norm, I would say. It's not like a lot of our guys are doing, parallel bar. Watching George St. Pierre on the parallel bars alone is impressive. This is a unbelievable karate fighter. So yeah, it's impressive what he did, but every now and again you get new direction, innovation, and that our sport of MMA, perhaps more than any I've been around, is about innovation and creating new methods to get a competitive advantage, and that's where these things come from. Also, an understanding, like George, again, saw himself as a professional athlete, not just a fighter, like the lifestyle of a professional athlete, all the different components that we're talking about, really embraced that, health, well-being, injury, reduction, and all those types of things.
I think all that we've talked about so far, and particularly answer that last question there, Duncan. We've been talking a lot about data, making objective decisions, but also talking about new concepts in emerging areas, and the handbook as well. And I've seen some very nice flow diagrams that you've created on systems and processes. We've just been talking about individualizing programs. I'm just wondering how much do you use the models that you've created? How much flex do you have in those systems and processes? And do you sometimes need to investigate new and emerging areas, or are there any new and emerging areas of, for example, conditioning that you see coming into play now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, Alan. The theory and the processes that we put in place, we absolutely utilize, not just kind of theory and then we just ditch the theory. That's our mantra, that's our philosophy. Same as you talking about, you and Danny are talking about what you do. So you've got to have an approach. You've got to have something that you believe in, and ours is very much built around objectivity and intentionally targeting physiology. It's an adaptation-led programming strategy. Now, if you don't know how you're influencing the adaptation, then that doesn't sit well with us. So that's our approach. That's our philosophy. Is there a ton of innovation going on here? Yeah, we're trying to be creative. We're trying to learn new things as alongside our kind of standard day-to-day what we're doing. So that's always spinning in the background, and that's everything from instrumented mouth guards, where we can look at head impacts and taking away, characterizing like a GPS unit in soccer, but doing it through instrumented mouthpieces and things like that. So we get player loads. That's kind of an innovation project we've got going on at the minute. Nutritional factors, where we're creating different blends of supplements for post-fight in concussion mitigation strategies, where we're looking at energy delivery to the brain, and then inflammatory reduction and all these different things. So yeah, we've always got things where we're interrogating the sport and we're trying to look at new methods. But we've then got a core approach right now that we implement, coming back to some of the flow diagrams, that's what our team believes, that's what our staff believe in. We're on a big kick right now around concurrent training, because that's what our sport is. What is concurrent training beyond just your classic Paris paper of, you know, resistance training over here and endurance training over here. That's a little bit rudimental for our sport. Like, that's not as simple as that. We've got concurrent training between alactic and glycolytic that sits, you know, your red zone heart training stuff is bang on, you know, just in terms of that's a concurrent challenge with a divergent physiology, and what are we doing to manage that? So, you know, we're really starting to piece together what MMA is and what MMA training should be, under the umbrella of efficiency, because that's the skill of our sport as well. Is like, you've got all these different training attributes that you need to put into your program. How do you do that efficiently? We haven't got time to be doing redundant training. So how can we maximize the potential of all these things under a training system and be targeted? And then that again comes back to, well, if we're going to be targeted, we need to know this reverse engineering process of what's your gap analysis and what are you trying to target. So it all meshes in together. I wouldn't say right now we're doing anything crazily different from interval training or HIIT training, you know, activating mitochondrial biosynthesis through, you know, high intensity intervals versus long, slow, kind of prolonged work. That's kind of a given. You know, we're not really moving the needle too much there, but what we're really doing is, how do you package it for our sport is, I think, the revolutionary stuff that we're getting into.
That's wicked. So
yeah, that's kind of what me and Danny decided quite a long time, because he's literally just me and Danny working on boxing science, and there's so many avenues and lines of research that we could have gone down, but there's so many things that we do know. Do we really need to know that much more about interval training? Well, not really, but do we need to know more about how we apply interval training in this particular athlete, in this particular situation, with these constraints? Well, yes, we do. And that's where we use the research, we use the literature to make informed decisions about our athletes on that particular level. Just on concussion, Duncan, have you got to the point of trying to investigate concussion and quantify that level or magnitude of concussion at all? Is there any technology that you're using there? Because I was working on a research project last year where I was scanning retinas, and we were looking at the choroid, which is been reported as the most metabolically active, from a physiological point of view, region of the body, with the view in a few years' time, after a bit more research, of trying to look at whether or not changes or changes in the thickness of the choroid or activity of the choroid reflects magnitude of concussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we are absolutely. We have an ongoing research study that looks at cognitive function from biological markers and imaging of the brain with our fighters, both, you know, currently fighting and retired fighters as well. So we can look at an attrition rate across the kind of fighter life cycle. So yeah, we've had that going a little while now, but we're bringing online via the PI some pretty cool, you know, new technology stuff, which I can't go into too much because it's, you know, I've signed NDAs and stuff like that. But again, looking at instrumented mouth guards, of trying to profile impacts and things like that, because again, we want to make the fight within the parameters of the rules as safe as possible for our fighters, right? Training and managing that within the non-competition environment is a critical aspect as well. So, you know, looking at, you know, some new technology where we can get, you know, infrared measures of heart rate and pressure and temperatures, and then obviously accelerometry and gyroscope activities around head impacts and the nature of different head impacts, being able to classify those and then overlay kind of VR assessment of cognitive function. So using some VR technologies for a diagnostic alongside the accumulation of data showing, let's call it load characteristics, let's say. We're moving down those avenues now, which is very exciting for us. And And again, just represents, our commitment to athlete health and athlete well-being. Let's say the white elephant, the elephant in the room of any combat sport is sparring, and how much sparring you do. Is 2 days enough? Is 3 days too much? Is doing it 3 days for 3 weeks in a row too much, or is it take a week off in the middle? All this type of stuff nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence from the fight community. Absolutely, they've been doing this for years and years and years, right? And how they feel and how the fighters feel. But by being able to put data against that and really objectively demonstrate what it's doing or how you should manage that load, is something we're really interested in doing.
Yeah, I won a podcast of the week. It weren't coaches, it were like kind of podcasters, media, and one of the subjects were how much should an athlete spar? What are our opinions on sparring? And they all had different opinions. And talking about different coaches, it's all more or less like a matter of opinion and personal experience at the moment. And to get more research on it would be massive for not only MMA but for boxing as well.
Yeah, we're definitely excited about it, and like I say, hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to put something more concrete out around the characteristics of head impacts and cognitive assessment and those types of things. So the UFC, we're in a combat sport. The one of the side effects or the consequences of our sport is TBI, concussion. If you're knocked out, concussion, right? So we're not shying away from it, and quite the opposite. We're investing a significant amount of money for research and biological research with the Cleveland Clinic, and we've been committed to that for 5-6 years now. And then we're bringing online new technologies to try and gain insight in our world-class fighters, because we want to protect our assets. That's what we're about. Is the fighter are the asset, and we want to maximize their longevity in our company, and that's where it all comes from.
So over the last 5 or 10 minutes, you mentioned a lot about optimizing performance and then optimizing the safety of the sport as well. And something that is obviously can optimize performance and make sure that it's safe is the weight cut. And, MMA, there's been a lot of publicity about kind of extreme weight cuts. Obviously the UFC have made significant steps to making that more safe and effective. Can you explain some of the stuff that you've put in place since the Performance Institute launched in 2017?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's one of the main things when we got on board, when we opened up our doors and we got on board with what the fight community are doing. It's certainly something we want to give more efficacy to the approach. We're in a weight class sport, and that's part and parcel of what our fighters have to go through. But if they're going to be cutting weight, we want to make sure it's done in the most appropriate fashion and the safest and healthiest fashion possible. And we want to make sure that their rebound is done effectively so that it can optimize their performance post weight cut. And we also, to some extent, want to support athletes make decisions around weight classification and which weight class they should be in. And again, our data is something that is a goldmine to be able to support that kind of conversation. So, yeah, we've done a lot with our dietitians and our nutrition team have done a significant amount of work in trying to influence the events. We've brought on board kind of meal delivery companies, so now we can we can deliver meals up to 8 weeks in advance of a fight and take care of a fighter's kind of holistic dietary requirements, where we can manage it and get ahead of the weight descent. We have an executive chef now that goes to every single pay-per-view event and kind of cooks meals, every meal in a fight week for fighters. So it's just removing that requirement from their considerations. Normally you go to Jacksonville or whatever, where am I going to get my next meal from? What am I eating? Well, now we've got a Performance Institute staff chef that is prepping all the meals on site, is delivered to their rooms, and it's taken off the agenda. Do you know what I mean? That's been a massive influence. We service 22 of the 41 fights we have a year, something like that. And we've just brought another executive chef online. So we've expanded, we now have 2 chefs that come under our umbrella. So that's a huge influence. 3 years ago, in year one, so 2017 to 18, we had about 41 missed weights in that year, and we had 5 fights cancelled due to weight-related issues. In the second year, we had about 26 missed weights and only 2 cancelled bouts. And then this last year, we had 19 missed weights and 0 cancelled bouts. So, you know, in the world, we work with about 80% of every fight card now on the weight management and the dietary side of feeding. There's obviously still other companies out there and you know, people providing services to fighters. So right now it's not exclusive, but our track record is very, very good. And again, it's because we have a holistic approach to the whole weight descent, everything from, you know, the S&C and the nutrition 8, 10, 12 weeks prior to a fight, throughout your whole weight descent, where we can manage and monitor that into a fight week, which is like the last mile of a marathon is the most critical, right? And really nailing down what they're doing there, making sure that they hit the scales effectively, and then really working on supplementation and electrolytes and, you know, refueling and the rehydration strategies as well, which is so critical for our guys weighing in 24 hours before the fight.
Yeah, the thing like you're saying about the chef being there, that's a massive thing. You know, I've been all over. I've been in Chicago, been to Japan. I've done a fight in Peterborough, and it's always a challenge to make sure that they get
Peterborough, Tokyo, and Chicago. Peterborough's getting some props there, mate. Jeez.
Yeah, I'd say the most impressive that I've done was in Japan. Can you believe it that everything was in Japanese and nothing in English? Can you imagine that?
Danny.
But we got there, and I was expecting to be like at least something like being translated to English. Everything was in Japanese. We're going around, and I got some chicken, and that was just awful. Yeah. And I actually asked the waitress and the waiters to see whether they could cook something in the back. They couldn't understand what I was saying. Even when they understood, they were like very abiding by the rules. So I was like thinking, what are we going to do for this athlete? And then we were walking, and we found a British pub in the middle of Yokohama, and we were down these stairs. We were underground as well. Went down, and there's all like kind of British memorabilia all over the wall. And this guy from Bristol, been living there 30 or 40 years, and he had fish and chips on the menu, but the fish was fresh, and they did the batter all themselves, so like we could have the fresh fish. And we actually went into his kitchen, went to market, got some veg, and we cooked it in there. If it weren't for that British pub, we'd have been in trouble.
That's the beauty of what we can do now. We're sending a chef to, you know, New Zealand, to Brazil, to, you know, some of these places where, you know, language and going to a supermarket is really hard for a fighter to figure out what they're doing. Now that's all taken care of by our support structure, which is free of charge for any of the UFC fighters on the fight card. So it's a game changer. But again, why are we doing it? Why are we making that investment? Well, because we want to make sure that we minimize the risk of missed weights. And we've had over 50% reduction in 3 years in missed weights because of our support. So, you know, we're on the right track for sure with that.
Yeah, UFC, it just sounds like an amazing company to be involved with. From a personal standpoint, like what have been the highlights? I'm sure that there's been a few exciting times over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely exciting. It remains to be excited. I mean, listen, just walking into a brand new world-class facility on day one was like into Aladdin's cave, right? It's, you know, this is amazing. But you know, the team around us is awesome. You know, the staff that we have, the melting pot of ideas of being around professionals that, you know, just every day challenge each other, but are totally aligned to the same mission to, you know, to interrogate and push and challenge each other, but to do it for the greater good of our whole infrastructure. It is awesome. And then, opening our facility in China was a really cool kind of, 18 months into it, we were already opening a 93,000 square foot facility in Shanghai, China. It's like, this is crazy. We've only just opened in Vegas.
Yeah.
And the likelihood is that we'll have footprints in other parts and other territories of the world soon. So, yeah, the UFC is an entertainment company, by trade, but it's a really dynamic and exciting company to be around. And just super humbled and privileged to be here, enjoying every day. And the team that we have here and also in Shanghai are just awesome people and really good professionals. So it's exciting continuing to shape the sport of MMA. And hopefully people see value in what we're doing. And like I say, in moving forwards here, when we're going to be launching some pretty significant digital aspects to our business, where people will have open access to information, and also some paid kind of things that you can get more higher level insight to as well. And webinars where you'll be able to interact with our staff, and those types of things are all going to be coming online here soon. So we're excited about what that holds for the future as well.
Sounds amazing. Well, I think that concludes it and finishes on a brilliant point. Thanks very much for your time. Hopefully we can transition into some more normal time soon, and we see the UFC back on top, big audiences, big fights, and we can't wait to see what's going to come out of the UFC Performance Institute.
Cool. Well, listen, I appreciate, chatting to you guys. I always big fans of what you guys are doing back at home there. So keep up the good work. And just again, humbled by the opportunity to chat and share and, speak to you guys on the podcast. So thanks so much.
We appreciate it, Duncan.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right.
So, Alan, a little review. How good was that? See if I'm Duncan.
So good. Do you know what? It feels like the UFC Performance Institute and Duncan's program has been around for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? It just feels so wide ranging and encompassing in all the aspects of athlete support. It's hard to believe that he's been set up and run to such a world-class level, world-leading level within about 3 years.
Yeah. The athletes are given the best possible opportunity to achieve and to put on amazing performances. And you watch like UFC fights now. I remember talking to someone like years and years ago. This is how long ago it were. I just had my driving theory, and randomly talking to someone on a bench in the middle of Sheffield, because I had the UFC game, and I said, I prefer boxing. It's too much grappling and wrestling, a bit low intensity for me, like UFC. Yeah. And obviously now that it's progressed to a level where it's just like the fights are absolutely amazing, and a lot of it is down to the technique getting better, but their physical attributes are just outstanding. And when I've been doing, I mentioned it in the podcast, it weren't a shameless like kind of plug for the Train Like a Superstar series on Instagram. If you're listening to this or watching this, you need to get over to my Instagram, watch the Train Like a Superstar, watching boxing training, and then watching MMA athletes. MMA in terms of physical preparation on another level. I mentioned George St. Pierre. Obviously, he's a standout athlete, but there's loads of others that I just think there's no way that I could do it. Never mind a boxer doing strength and conditioning. So I think like UFC, that's why it's accelerated to the top of one of the most popular sports. Yeah,
it's probably one of the fastest growing sports out there, isn't it? It all comes down to the organization, who's driving the organization, what do they want to get out of it? Well, they want high performance, they want exciting fights, but they also want to help prepare boxers in the safest way possible and keep them safe and keep them safe from harm. And all this is much like our approach is wrapped up in safety and preparation and doing things the right way to ensure their athletes are prolonging their careers, but you're also getting that excitement out of it as well. Just brilliant.
Fantastic. So, yeah, so that's the end of the podcast. Thanks everybody for watching or listening. If you're not a subscriber to our YouTube or podcast channels yet, please hit the subscribe button. And also, if you want to find out more about the UFC Performance Institute's training methods, we have a range of different workshops that Duncan himself and Bo Sandoval, who is a strength and conditioning coach at the UFC Performance Institute, have delivered for the Boxing Science membership. You can sign up for free, a 7-day free trial. Then it's £8.99 a month. You've got a range of different workshops, massive exercise library, and also you've got S&C weekly workouts. But in these workshops that Bo and Duncan do, you get a greater insight into the training methods of the UFC Performance Institute. Okay, guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next podcast.